Is a dictatorship truly capable of nurturing development amongst its population? My thesis statement states, dictatorships do not lead to development in a population. Dictatorships are exceedingly unlikely to foster any viable form of development in the population over which they govern. A dictatorship is run by a small, elite group of officials who not only consider consulting the population a waste of time, but also consider any negative feedback to be a form of dissension. If, for example, the United States was to become a dictatorship tomorrow, chances are that at first we as a population would notice no discernible difference between the new regime and the former regime. However, as time went on, we would see obvious negative changes. Civil liberties would be restricted, opposition parties would be abolished, and those that objected would be imprisoned or executed. I have researched many dictatorships from throughout history, and have seen many examples where dictatorships failed at establishing anything close to an environment that is conducive to development. In addition to this, my mother and my maternal grandparents lived through several military juntas in their native Pakistan, witnessing firsthand the negative consequences dictators have had on the population. My first point is that dictatorships destroy all hopes for development in all aspects of a nation's infrastructure, political system, and education system. My second point is that dictatorships restrict any possible dissension or opposition to the one-party system, preventing any further development to social or cultural aspects in the lives of the civilians they govern. And my third and final point is that no dictatorship in history has ever successfully developed itself into a peaceful society without bending the majority of the population to its will, whether through force or oppressive laws. Now, let us first explore what a dictatorship does to a nation. Dictatorships are notorious for destroying all hopes at establishing an effective infrastructure within the countries they govern. Past dictatorships have always promised sweeping land or agricultural reform, such as in Mao's China. There, Mao Zedong attempted to industrialize and modernize China, introducing revolutionary new land reforms and mandating that all citizens were required to work in improving the country in his great leap forward. However, poor planning combined with corruption resulted in a famine that caused the deaths of, according to Amnesty International, 45 million people, and the collapse of the Chinese economy. While all of this could have been avoided had Mao allowed for more input on the public works project, his dictatorship placed a veritable noose around any sort of dissension or objection to his plans. As a result, China was unable to recover and is only just now, in the 21st century, starting to develop economically. Now that we've had a look at how a dictatorship has affected the infrastructure of a nation, let us look at how the cultural aspects of the civilian populace are affected. Cultural and social norms and traditions are also affected by dictatorships. In fact, in many cases, these are the first aspects of society to be manipulated by dictators and their cabinets. It gives said government the opportunity to manipulate the general populace in submission, as well as encourage popularity among possible dissenters. The greatest example of this is present-day North Korea, where Kim Jong-un, like his father and grandfather before him, has a massive cult of personality. In North Korea, a citizen is educated only to serve the state, the party, and above all, the dear leader, Kim Jong-un, according to Juche ideals and principles. The North Korean government maintains this control through the use of propaganda techniques exceedingly similar to those found in George Orwell's novel, 1984. Propaganda is broadcast in every home 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. According to the CIA, this propaganda is transmitted over radios that cannot be turned off, that cannot be turned down. Compulsory classes educate school children to inform on their parents or other family members if they dissent. Should there be any dissent, the government of North Korea will place the dissenter and all family members into a concentration camp, where they and the rest of their families will spend the rest of not only their lives, but all descendants for the next 2 generations. This provides security from any possible attempts at rebelling against Kim Jong-un's dictatorship. In addition to this, as you can see on this graph, taken from the British newspaper, the Daily Mail, North Korea is also extremely unstable in the expenditure of its gross domestic product. This is a comparison between North Korea and its neighbor to the south, South Korea. North Korea has a population of roughly 25 million people. South Korea has almost double that amount. The average income of a North Korean under the dictatorship of Kim Jong-un is $1,800. The average income of a South Korean under the democracy under the democratic government in South Korea, I beg your pardon, is $32,400. Most of all of North Korea's expenditure, most of all, North Korea's entire military expenditure is based off of their gross domestic product. Very little of it goes back to the people. This does not allow for sufficient development of cultural and social aspects in the population. North Korea's infrastructure is crumbling, power stations are falling apart. According to the U.S. Geographical Service, earthquake sensors are gone in the region, and this is a region that is lying on an active fault line. Due to their gross misuse of state funds, the North Koreans have essentially bankrupted the entire economy of North Korea. Now, we look at the history of dictatorships and their unsuccessful records. In past history, dictatorships have all ultimately failed in what they originally set out to do: establish a single party to rule over a nation with no dissent. Anywhere in 20th century history, be it Pinochet's Chile or Kemal's Afghanistan, dictatorships have brought nothing but death and destruction rather than peace and development. In the case of Afghanistan, under Babrak Karmal, his rule would set in motion events and organizations that continue to affect us as Americans today. Karmal was the leader of Afghanistan in the 1980s during the Soviet-Afghan War. His policies towards modernizing the nation and granting women's rights enraged the predominantly Muslim population, and his allowing of Soviet troops to intervene served as the spark that would set off this proverbial powder keg. His actions served as the flashpoint for the creation of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, which in turn were responsible for the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. This is not the only dictatorship that has caused bloodshed. For example, Joseph Stalin, the Soviet purges, 23 million people dead. Leopold II of Belgium in the Congo, 15 million dead. These are not governments. These are maniacs. Now let us review what we've gone over. Dictatorships do not allow for development of infrastructure. Second, dictatorships do not allow for social or cultural growth. And third, dictatorships have historically failed. In conclusion, dictatorships as a whole are horrible forms of government, as those that run them are typically completely incompetent rulers of their nations. Thank you.